Get out, now! Everyone watched in stunned silence when Savannah Fowler gripped the edge of the marble table, her coral uniform wrinkled from where she'd grabbed the heir to billions. Her voice cut through Mama's kitchen like a blade. Get out of this restaurant now! The heir to billions had never been physically thrown out of anywhere in his life, but this waitress wasn't backing down. You have no idea who you're messing with. Kason Davenport screamed as Savannah Fowler's hands gripped his designer shirt. The billionaire's son had just been physically thrown out by a waitress who refused to tolerate his harassment. His designer shirt was wrinkled, his ego shattered. You're just a waitress. I could buy this entire dump and shut it down tomorrow. What happens when a single moment of harassment in a family diner echoes into the sterile boardroom of a billion-dollar empire? This isn't just a story about standing up to a bully. It's the story of Savannah Fowler, a waitress whose courage couldn't be bought, and the day the man who harassed her watched his billionaire father arrive in a helicopter with an offer that would change everything. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust us, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue.
The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Mama's kitchen on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, Georgia, casting golden rays across the checkered floor of the bustling family diner. The lunch rush was building momentum, and the familiar symphony of clinking plates, sizzling bacon, and friendly chatter filled the air. Savannah Fowler moved between tables with practiced grace, her coral-colored uniform crisp despite the hectic pace. At 26, she possessed a natural elegance that couldn't be hidden by the modest work clothes. Her dark skin glowed with health, and her hair was pulled back in a neat bun that framed her high cheekbones and bright brown eyes. She wore comfortable white sneakers that had seen better days but were spotlessly clean. "Table 6 needs more coffee, honey," called out Juliana Chase from behind the counter. At 7 months pregnant, Juliana's movements had slowed considerably, but her sunny disposition never wavered. Her blonde hair was tied back with a cheerful yellow ribbon, and her maternity uniform stretched over her growing belly. "I've got it, Jules," Savannah replied with a warm smile, grabbing the coffee pot. "You just focus on taking orders. Your feet must be killing you." Savannah had been working at Mama's Kitchen for 3 years, ever since she'd moved to Atlanta from Jamaica with dreams of becoming a nurse. Those dreams hadn't died, but they'd been put on hold while she worked multiple jobs to support herself and send money back home to her grandmother in Kingston. She attended community college part-time, slowly chipping away at her prerequisites between shifts at the diner and her evening job at a local bookstore. "Here you go, honey," she said, refilling an elderly man's coffee cup. "Can I get you anything else?" "Just that beautiful smile of yours, dear," the man replied with a grandfatherly wink. "You remind me of my daughter. Same kind heart." Savannah's face lit up with genuine warmth. These interactions, these small moments of human connection, made the long hours worthwhile. She treated every customer like family, remembering their preferences, asking about their lives, celebrating their good news, and offering comfort during tough times. The bell above the door chimed as more customers entered. Savannah glanced over and saw Quinn Ferguson, the restaurant manager, greeting a group of businesspeople. Quinn was a fair man in his 50s who'd given Savannah a chance when other places had turned her away, citing her lack of experience in ways that felt coated with prejudice. "Savannah, can you handle table 12? Quinn called out. "It's the Richardson party. They requested you specifically." Mrs. Richardson was a regular, a retired teacher who always ordered the same thing and tipped generously. Savannah hurried over, notepad ready. "Mrs. Richardson, how lovely to see you again. How did your grandson's graduation go?" "Oh, Savannah, it was wonderful. He mentioned you in his speech. Can you believe that?" said the kind waitress at Mama's Kitchen, always asked about his studies and encouraged him to keep going. Savannah felt her heart swell. This was why she did this job with pride, why she refused to let anyone make her feel small or unworthy. Every person who walked through these doors deserved respect and kindness, regardless of how much money they had in their wallet. Meanwhile, across town in the exclusive Buckhead district, a very different morning was unfolding. Cason Davenport stood in the marble-floored foyer of his father's $40 million mansion, adjusting his platinum watch with careless precision. At 24, he was tall and lean, with perfectly styled light brown hair and green eyes that held no warmth. He wore a tailored navy suit that cost more than most people made in a month, paired with Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than Savannah's rent. "Your car is ready, sir," announced the household staff member, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patterson who'd worked for the family for 15 years. Cason barely acknowledged her, absorbed in his phone screen where his trust fund balance glowed in 8 figures. He was the only heir to Davenport Industries, a conglomerate that owned everything from tech companies to real estate developments across the Southeast. His father, Roger Bruce Davenport, had built the empire from nothing, but Cason had never known anything except abundance. "Tell Franklin I want the Lamborghini today," Cason said without looking up. "And make sure he has the new sound system installed by tomorrow." "Sir, Franklin is off today. His mother passed away yesterday. The funeral is this afternoon." Cason finally looked up, his expression annoyed rather than sympathetic. "Then get someone else. I don't have time for sob stories." Mrs. Patterson's face tightened, but she maintained her professional composure. "Of course, sir. I'll arrange for another driver." This was Cason's world, where people existed to serve his whims and emotions were inconveniences to be managed by money. He'd never held a real job, never faced genuine consequences for his actions, never learned that other people's feelings mattered as much as his own comfort. 20 minutes later, Cason sat in the back of his second-choice vehicle, a mere Mercedes, scrolling through social media posts from his equally privileged friends. They were planning to meet for lunch somewhere authentic and real, because Oliver Ayres had seen a documentary about how regular people live and found it fascinating. "Where to today, sir?" asked the replacement driver, a young man who clearly needed this job. "That place Oliver mentioned. Mama's something. In that area with all the, regular people." The driver nodded, though his jaw tightened slightly at the dismissive tone. "Mama's Kitchen on Peachtree Street?" "Whatever. Just drive." As the Mercedes navigated through Atlanta traffic, Cason felt a familiar itch of boredom. His trust fund provided everything except purpose, and his father's recent speeches about learning the value of work had grown increasingly tiresome. What did the old man know about being young and rich? This was his time to enjoy life before settling into whatever executive position his last name would guarantee him. Back at Mama's Kitchen, Savannah was refilling salt shakers during a brief lull when Juliana approached, one hand supporting her lower back. "Savannah, I hate to ask, but could you cover my section this afternoon? These Braxton Hicks contractions are getting stronger, and I think I should go home and rest." "Of course, honey," Savannah replied immediately. "You take care of yourself and that baby. I've got everything covered here." "You're an angel," Juliana said gratefully. "I don't know what this place would do without you." "We look out for each other," Savannah said simply. "That's what family does." And that's exactly what Mama's Kitchen felt like to her. A family. A place where hard work was valued, where people treated each other with respect, where everyone from the busboy to the manager understood that dignity didn't depend on your bank account. As she prepared for the afternoon shift, Savannah had no idea that her carefully built world was about to collide with forces that would test everything she believed about justice, respect, and the power of standing up for what's right. The stage was set. 2 worlds, 2 people from completely different backgrounds, were about to meet in a way that would change both their lives forever. The lunch rush hit Mama's Kitchen like a tidal wave just after 1 o'clock. Savannah found herself covering both her section and Juliana's, weaving between tables with remarkable efficiency. The familiar rhythm of service calmed her nerves even as sweat beaded on her forehead from the non-stop movement. "Order up," shouted Ezekiel Walters from the kitchen, sliding 2 plates across the pass. The 60-year-old cook had worked at Mama's Kitchen for over a decade, and his weathered hands could flip pancakes and grill burgers with artistry that came from years of practice. Savannah grabbed the plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, delivering them to table 8 with a smile. "Here you go, gentlemen. Can I get you anything else?" "Just the check when you get a chance, darling," replied one of the construction workers who frequented the diner. "Got to get back to the job site." As Savannah turned toward the register, she heard the distinctive purr of an expensive engine outside. Through the window, she watched a gleaming black Mercedes pull into the parking lot, looking completely out of place among the pickup trucks and modest sedans that usually filled their spaces. The bell above the door chimed, and 3 young men walked in, their designer clothes and cocky expressions immediately setting them apart from the regular clientele. Savannah recognized the type instantly. Rich kids looking for an adventure in the real world, treating her workplace like some kind of theme park. Kason Davenport led the group, his green eyes scanning the diner with barely concealed disdain. His friends, Oliver Ayres and Logan Thornton, flanked him like an entourage, their expensive watches catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "This is it?" Kason asked, his voice carrying across the now quieter restaurant. Several customers looked up from their meals, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Oliver said it was authentic," Logan replied, pulling out his phone to take pictures. "Look at these decorations. It's like stepping back in time." Quinn Ferguson approached them with a professional smile, though Savannah noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. "Welcome to Mama's Kitchen, gentlemen. Table for 3. Somewhere clean, I hope," Kason said, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. An elderly woman at table 4 frowned at the comment, but said nothing. Quinn led them to table 7 in Savannah's section, right next to where Mrs. Richardson was finishing her peach cobbler. Savannah took a deep breath, grabbed 3 menus, and approached their table with her usual professional demeanor. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm Savannah, and I'll be taking care of you today. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Kason looked up from his phone, his eyes traveling slowly from her face down to her uniform and back up again in a way that made her skin crawl. Well, the service here just got interesting. Sweet tea, coffee, or soft drinks?" Savannah repeated, her voice steady despite the warning bells going off in her head. "I'll have whatever you recommend, beautiful," Kason said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "What do you drink when you're off work? Something exotic from your homeland?" Oliver and Logan snickered, and Savannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd dealt with inappropriate customers before, but something about this group felt different. More entitled. More dangerous. "I'll give you a few minutes to look over the menu," she said firmly, setting the menus down and starting to walk away. "Hold on there, island girl," Kason called out, loud enough that half the restaurant heard him. "We're not done talking to you." Savannah stopped and turned back, her professional mask slipping slightly. "Excuse me. You heard me. Come back here. We want to get to know you better." His tone had an edge that made Mrs. Richardson shift uncomfortably in her seat. From behind the counter, Quinn watched the interaction with growing concern. He'd seen this before. Wealthy customers who thought their money gave them the right to treat his staff however they wanted. But Savannah had always handled difficult situations with grace. "Sir, I'll be happy to take your order when you're ready," Savannah said, maintaining her professionalism despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "Oh, we're ready for a lot of things," Logan said with a crude laugh. "How about you show us what real Caribbean hospitality looks like?" The restaurant had gone almost completely quiet now. Even Ezekiel had stopped cooking and was watching through the kitchen window. Savannah felt dozens of eyes on her, some sympathetic, others curious about how she would handle the situation. "I need to check on my other tables," Savannah said, turning away again. This time Kason stood up. "I don't think so. When I'm talking to you, you listen. Do you know who I am?" "I don't care who you are," Savannah replied, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "You're a customer, and you'll treat me with respect, or you can leave." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Kason's face flushed red, unused to anyone, especially someone he considered beneath him, speaking to him that way. Respect. He laughed coldly. You're a waitress. I probably spend more on lunch than you make in a week. You should be grateful I'm even talking to you. Mrs. Richardson gathered her purse and quietly left money on her table, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. Other customers began to murmur among themselves, but nobody stood up to intervene. Savannah felt something snap inside her chest. 3 years of working multiple jobs, of being talked down to, of watching people like Kaysen treat hardworking people like they were invisible, all crystallized into this moment. Money doesn't give you the right to disrespect people, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent restaurant. And it certainly doesn't give you the right to harass me or anyone else who works here. Kaysen took a step closer, invading her personal space. Harass. Sweetheart, you have no idea what harassment looks like. I'm being friendly. But if you want to play hardball, we can do that too. That's when Quinn finally moved, stepping out from behind the counter. Gentlemen, I think it's time for you to leave. Actually, we haven't ordered yet, Oliver said, pulling out his phone to record. This is great content. We're not leaving, Kaysen declared, his voice rising. Not until this little island princess learns some manners about how to treat her betters. The word betters echoed through the restaurant like a slap. Savannah felt her grandmother's voice in her head. All those stories about standing up for yourself, about never letting anyone make you feel small just because they had more money. Better. Savannah's voice was dangerously quiet. You walk into our restaurant, insult our customers, harass our staff, and you think that makes you better than us? I think my bank account speaks for itself, Kaysen sneered. Your bank account didn't teach you basic human decency, Savannah shot back. And it obviously didn't buy you any class. The insult hit its mark. Kaysen's face contorted with rage, and he took another step forward, close enough that Savannah could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the stench of entitlement. You little... What? What were you going to call me? Savannah interrupted, her voice rising now. Every eye in the restaurant was fixed on them. Go ahead. Say what you really think about people like me. Kaysen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, caught between his anger and the sudden realization that he was being watched by dozens of people, some of whom had their phones out. I'll have your job, he finally managed. Do you know what I can do to a place like this? One phone call and you'll be closed by tomorrow. Then make your call, Savannah said, crossing her arms. But you're going to do it from outside my restaurant. The confrontation had reached its boiling point. Customers sat frozen, watching this David and Goliath moment unfold. Quinn stood ready to intervene, but something told him Savannah needed to handle this herself. Kaysen looked around the restaurant, expecting support, expecting someone to put this waitress in her place. Instead, he saw faces filled with disgust at his behavior and admiration for the young woman standing up to him. For the first time in his life, Kaysen Davenport realized that his money and name might not be enough to get him out of the mess he'd created. The tension in Mama's kitchen had reached a breaking point. Kaysen stood mere inches from Savannah, his designer cologne unable to mask the ugly arrogance radiating from every pore. The restaurant had fallen completely silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic on Peachtree Street. You have exactly 10 seconds to step away from me, Savannah said, her voice deadly calm. Years of dealing with difficult customers had taught her to recognize when a situation was about to turn dangerous, and every instinct screamed that Kaysen was teetering on the edge of doing something truly stupid. Or what? Kaysen laughed, but there was a manic quality to it now. His friends had stopped recording, sensing that things were spiraling beyond entertaining social media content. You'll call security? Look around, princess. This dump doesn't have security. Oliver tugged at Kaysen's sleeve. Dude, maybe we should just go. This isn't worth it. Shut up, Oliver, Kaysen snapped without taking his eyes off Savannah. I'm not backing down from some uppity waitress who doesn't know her place. That was the final straw. Savannah had endured the racial undertones, the classist insults, and the personal harassment. But when Kaysen raised his voice and stepped even closer, invading her space with obvious intent to intimidate, something primal kicked in. "Get away from me," she said, placing both hands firmly on his chest and shoving him backward. Kaysen stumbled, his expensive shoes sliding on the polished floor. His arms windmilled as he fought for balance, crashing into an empty chair that clattered across the floor. The sound broke the spell that had held the restaurant frozen, and suddenly everyone was moving at once. "You put your hands on me!" Kaysen roared, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. "You assaulted me! I'll have you arrested!" "I defended myself," Savannah replied firmly, though her hands were shaking now from adrenaline. "You were threatening me." Quinn finally reached them, his face grim with the knowledge that this situation had just become a potential legal nightmare. "Sir, I need you to leave immediately." "I'm not going anywhere until she's arrested," Kaysen snarled, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the police right now." "Good," said a gravelly voice from the corner booth. Everyone turned to see Otis Gutierrez, a retired Atlanta police detective who'd been quietly eating his daily lunch special. At 72, he still carried himself with the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years dealing with bullies and troublemakers. "I've been watching this whole thing, son. You want to explain to responding officers how you were harassing this young lady." Kaysen's face went pale. He hadn't noticed the older black man sitting alone, hadn't realized that someone with law enforcement experience had witnessed his behavior. "She pushed me first," Kaysen insisted, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "After you invaded her personal space, made racial comments, and refused to leave when asked," Otis replied calmly, standing up from his booth. Despite his age, he was still an imposing figure at 6 feet tall. "Son, I've seen 1,000 punks like you. All bark until someone calls your bluff." Logan grabbed Kaysen's other arm. "Come on, man. Let's just get out of here before this gets worse." But Kaysen's pride wouldn't let him retreat. 3 years at an elite private university, surrounded by people who told him he was special because of his last name, had not prepared him for public humiliation at the hands of someone he'd been taught to consider inferior. "Do you people have any idea what you've done?" he asked, his voice rising to near hysteria. "My father owns half this city. I can destroy this place with one phone call. I can make sure none of you ever work again." "Your daddy might own half the city," said another voice from across the restaurant. "But he don't own us." The speaker was Marilyn Hunt, a local hairdresser who'd been coming to Mama's Kitchen for 15 years. At 55, she'd raised 4 children as a single mother and had zero patience for entitled rich boys throwing tantrums. "That's right," called out another customer. "Money don't make you better than anybody else." Suddenly, the restaurant erupted in supportive murmurs. Customer after customer began speaking up, voicing their disgust with Kaysen's behavior and their admiration for Savannah's courage. The tide had completely turned against him. Kaysen looked around wildly, realizing for the first time in his life that his name and wealth meant nothing to these people. They weren't impressed by his threats or intimidated by his family's power. If anything, his entitled attitude had only made them angrier. "This isn't over," he said, backing toward the door. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "Yeah, we do," Savannah replied, her confidence returning as she felt the support of her customers surrounding her. "We're messing with a spoiled brat who never learned basic respect for other human beings." The words hit Kaysen like a physical blow. He'd been called many things in his life, but never to his face, never in front of a room full of people who clearly agreed with the assessment. Oliver and Logan finally managed to drag him toward the exit, apologizing quietly to other customers as they passed. The bell above the door chimed as they left, and for a moment, the restaurant remained silent. Then Otis started clapping. Slowly, one by one, other customers joined in until the entire restaurant was applauding Savannah's courage. She felt tears stinging her eyes, overwhelmed by the support from people she'd served with pride for 3 years. "You did good, baby girl," Marilyn said, walking over to squeeze Savannah's hand. Don't you let nobody make you feel bad about standing up for yourself. Thank you, Savannah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Quinn approached, his expression concerned. Savannah, are you okay? Do you need a minute? I'm fine, she said, wiping her eyes quickly. But what about his threats? What if he really can hurt the restaurant? Let me worry about that, Quinn replied. What you did took courage. I'm proud to have you on my team. Outside in the parking lot, Kaysen was having a complete meltdown. He paced beside the Mercedes, his hands shaking with rage and humiliation. I can't believe this happened, he said for the 10th time. A waitress. A freaking waitress put her hands on me and threw me out like common trash. Maybe we should have just left when she asked us to, Oliver suggested weakly. Don't you start, Kaysen snapped. This is about respect. About knowing your place in the world. That girl just made the biggest mistake of her life. Logan was scrolling through his phone. Dude, someone posted a video. It's already got like 1,000 views. Kaysen grabbed the phone and watched in horror as the confrontation played out on the small screen. The video clearly showed him harassing Savannah, invading her space, and making racial comments before she finally pushed him away. In the stark light of social media, his behavior looked even worse than it had felt in the moment. Delete it, he demanded. Make them delete it. I can't control what other people post, Logan said, taking his phone back. Besides, it's already been shared a bunch of times. Kaysen felt panic rising in his chest. His father monitored social media mentions of the family name religiously. If this video reached Roger Davenport, there would be consequences Kaysen didn't want to imagine. We need to get ahead of this, he said, his mind racing. I need to call my lawyer. And the restaurant's corporate office. I'll buy the place and shut it down if I have to. But even as he made the threats, Kaysen felt something he'd never experienced before. Genuine fear. Not fear of physical harm or financial loss, but fear that his actions might finally have consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. Inside Mama's kitchen, service slowly returned to normal. Customers lingered longer than usual, many coming up to congratulate Savannah personally. The incident had transformed what could have been a humiliating experience into a rallying moment for the entire community. As Savannah refilled coffee cups and took new orders, she had no idea that 50 miles away, in a corporate boardroom overlooking downtown Atlanta, a billionaire was about to see a video that would change all their lives forever. The real confrontation was just beginning. The 38th floor of the Davenport Industries building hummed with quiet efficiency. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Atlanta's skyline, but Roger Bruce Davenport wasn't admiring the scenery. At 58, he possessed the weathered features of a man who'd built an empire from nothing, his steel-gray hair and piercing blue eyes reflecting decades of hard-fought business battles. Roger sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant, Delaney Clay, knocked on his office door. At 35, Delaney had worked for Roger for 8 years, earning his trust through unwavering professionalism and brutal honesty. Come in, Roger called without looking up from the financial projections. Mr. Davenport, there's something you need to see, Delaney said, her voice carefully neutral. She carried a tablet in her hands, her expression troubled. Roger finally looked up, noting the tension in her posture. In 8 years, Delaney had never brought him anything with that particular expression on her face. What is it? It's about Kaysen, sir. There's a video circulating on social media. It involves an incident at a restaurant this afternoon. Roger's jaw tightened. His son's antics had been a constant source of frustration, but they'd always been contained within their social circle. Private scandals could be managed, but public ones were different beasts entirely. Show me. Delaney placed the tablet on his desk and pressed play. Roger watched in growing horror as his son harassed a young waitress, made racial comments, and behaved in a way that contradicted every value Roger had tried to instill in him. When Kaysen was finally pushed away and thrown out of the restaurant, Roger felt something break inside his chest. "How many views?" he asked quietly. 12,000 and climbing. It's been shared on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Some of the comments are significant. Roger scrolled through the comments, each one a dagger to his reputation and his heart. People were calling for boycotts of Davenport Industries. Others were praising the waitress for her courage. Most damning of all, several comments identified Kaysen by name. Has anyone from the media reached out? 3 local news stations so far. I've been deflecting, but they're persistent. Roger closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 25 years of parenting failures crushing down on him. He'd given Kaysen everything material but somehow failed to give him character. The chickens were finally coming home to roost. Find out everything about this restaurant. Who owns it, who the waitress is, what happened before the video started. I want a complete picture. I'll handle it personally, Delaney assured him. What about Kaysen? Should I reach out to him? Not yet. I need to understand what we're dealing with first. Meanwhile, across town at Mama's Kitchen, Savannah was discovering that standing up to a bully came with unexpected complications. The restaurant had been busier than usual all afternoon, with many customers commenting on the video that was apparently making rounds on social media. I can't believe how many people have seen it, said Joseph Stanton, a regular customer who worked at the nearby auto repair shop. My wife shared it on Facebook, and it's got over 100 likes already. Savannah felt a knot forming in her stomach. She'd acted on principle, but she hadn't considered the potential consequences of her confrontation being broadcast to the world. What if the video made it harder for her to find other work? What if Kaysen's family really did have the power to hurt innocent people? Quinn noticed her distress and pulled her aside during a brief lull. You okay? You look worried. What if this backfires? Savannah asked quietly. What if his family comes after us? After you. I couldn't live with myself if other people got hurt because of my actions. Hey, Quinn said firmly, placing a fatherly hand on her shoulder. You did nothing wrong. That boy needed to be put in his place, and you were the only one brave enough to do it. But what if he really can shut us down? This place is like family to me. If I cost you your business. Stop right there, Quinn interrupted. This restaurant has been serving this community for 22 years. We've survived recessions, gentrification, and chain restaurants moving in down the street. We'll survive one spoiled rich kid's tantrum. But even as Quinn spoke the reassuring words, he was worried too. He'd built Mama's Kitchen from nothing, and it represented everything he'd worked for his entire adult life. If the Davenport family really did have the power Kaysen claimed, Quinn wasn't sure how long they could hold out against sustained pressure. At 4:15 p.m., Delaney's investigation was already bearing fruit. She'd made discreet inquiries through her network of contacts, painting a picture that was both better and worse than Roger had feared. The restaurant is called Mama's Kitchen, she reported, standing in front of Roger's desk with a folder of information. It's been family-owned for over 20 years, excellent reputation in the community. The waitress is Savannah Fowler, 26 years old, originally from Jamaica. She's been working there for 3 years while attending community college part-time. Any criminal record? Any reason my son might have targeted her specifically? Clean record. By all accounts, she's a model employee and well-respected by customers. I spoke to several people who frequent the restaurant. They all described her as professional, kind, and hardworking. Roger absorbed this information, feeling his disappointment in his son deepen. Kaysen hadn't been provoked or defending himself. He'd simply chosen to bully someone he perceived as powerless. What about witnesses to the full incident? I'm still working on that, but initial reports suggest your son initiated the confrontation. Multiple customers witnessed him making inappropriate comments and refusing to leave when asked. Roger stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city his business empire helped shape. Somewhere down there, A young woman was probably worried about her job security because his son had acted like an entitled monster. Get me the restaurant's security footage. Whatever it costs. Sir, are you sure? If we're seen as interfering with evidence. I'm not interfering. I'm investigating. There's a difference. Delaney nodded and made notes. What about Kaysen? He's been calling and texting, demanding that you handle this situation. Roger's phone had indeed been buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from his son. Each text revealed more about Kaysen's character than Roger had wanted to acknowledge. Let him sweat for a while. I want him to understand that his actions have consequences before we have that conversation. As the afternoon wore on, Roger found himself unable to concentrate on work. The video played on repeat in his mind, each viewing revealing new layers of his son's cruelty. The way Kaysen had invaded the waitress's personal space. The racial undertones in his comments. The complete lack of empathy for another human being. At 5:30 p.m., Delaney returned with more information, including contact details for several customers who'd witnessed the entire incident. I spoke with a retired police detective who was eating lunch there, she reported. Otis Gutierrez. He confirmed that your son was the aggressor throughout the confrontation. He also mentioned that Ms. Fowler showed remarkable restraint under the circumstances. Roger picked up his phone and scrolled through Kaysen's latest messages. Dad, you need to fix this now. That girl assaulted me and it's all over the internet. I'm being humiliated online. Do something. If you don't handle this, I'll find someone who will. Each message revealed the depth of Kaysen's delusion. Even faced with video evidence of his own behavior, he was playing the victim and demanding that his father clean up his mess. For 24 years, Roger had been doing exactly that. Every scrape, every complaint from teachers or other parents, every consequence that might have taught Kaysen valuable lessons about accountability had been smoothed away by money and influence. Roger realized he'd been trapped by circumstances just as much as the waitress was. His son's behavior was a direct result of Roger's own choices as a parent. They were bound together by this incident, unable to simply walk away from the consequences. The difference was that Savannah Fowler had acted with courage and dignity, while his son had revealed himself to be exactly the kind of person Roger despised most in the world. It was time to break the cycle. But first, Roger needed to understand exactly what kind of woman had been brave enough to stand up to his son when no one else would. As evening approached, both Savannah and Roger found themselves reviewing the same day from completely different perspectives, neither knowing that their lives were about to become irrevocably connected. The evening shift at Mama's Kitchen was winding down when Savannah finally had a moment to call her grandmother in Kingston. She stepped into the small office behind the kitchen, needing privacy for this conversation. The familiar sound of her grandmother's voice across the crackling international connection instantly transported her back to her childhood. "Nana, it's me," Savannah said, settling into Quinn's worn office chair. "Baby girl, how are you? You sound tired." Savannah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. "Something happened today, Nana. Something big." For the next 15 minutes, Savannah recounted the confrontation with Kaysen, trying to capture not just what happened but how it felt to finally stand up to someone who thought their money made them untouchable. "You did right, child," her grandmother said firmly when Savannah finished. "Your grandfather would be proud. Remember the stories I used to tell you about him standing up to the plantation owners." Savannah smiled despite her anxiety. Her grandmother, Hazley Gonzalez, was 78 years old and had raised Savannah alone after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Nana had worked as a seamstress her entire life, taking in laundry and mending clothes to keep food on the table and send Savannah to school. "I remember, Nana. But I'm scared. What if this man's family really can hurt people? What if I made things worse for everyone at the restaurant?" "Listen to me, Savannah Rose Fowler," her grandmother said, using her full name in the tone that meant business. "Your grandfather fought sugar plantation owners who had more money and power than this boy's family could dream of. He fought them because it was right, not because it was safe. Savannah's grandfather, Samuel Fowler, had been a labor organizer in 1960s Jamaica, fighting for fair wages and working conditions for sugarcane workers. He'd been threatened, beaten, and once even jailed for his activism. But he'd never backed down because he believed that human dignity was worth any risk. He used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear, her grandmother continued. Courage is doing what's right even when you're terrified. That's what you did today, baby. As they talked, Savannah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd arrived in Atlanta 3 years ago with 2 suitcases, $300, and a heart full of dreams about becoming a nurse. The transition had been harder than she'd imagined. Her Jamaican accent sometimes made customers impatient. Her lack of American work experience had closed many doors. But Quinn had seen something in her that others had missed. "How are your classes going?" her grandmother asked, pulling Savannah back to the present. "Good. I just finished my prerequisites. I'm hoping to get into the nursing program at Georgia State next fall." Savannah paused, voice dropping. "If I still have a job to pay for it, you'll find a way. You always do. Remember when you wanted to come to America and everyone said it was impossible? Remember when you needed money for your first semester and we didn't know where it would come from?" Savannah did remember. Her grandmother had sold her late husband's watch, a family heirloom that had been passed down for 3 generations, to help pay for Savannah's first semester at Atlanta Metropolitan Community College. The sacrifice had broken Savannah's heart, but Nana had insisted it was an investment in their family's future. "Every dollar I send you goes into that education fund," Savannah had promised, and she'd kept that promise religiously. Half of every paycheck, every tip, every penny she could spare went back to Jamaica to build a nest egg for her grandmother's retirement and her own nursing school tuition. Meanwhile, across town in Buckhead, Roger Davenport was having his own reckoning with the past. He sat alone in his home office, a glass of scotch untouched on his desk as he stared at framed photographs of his late wife and young son. The house felt enormous and empty, as it had for the past 8 years since Margaret died. At 42,000 square feet, it was a monument to his success and a daily reminder of his failures as a father and husband. Roger picked up a photograph from 1998, showing him and 5-year-old Kaysen building a treehouse in their backyard. In the picture, Kaysen was grinning with genuine joy, his small hands covered in sawdust as he helped his father hammer boards together. When had that sweet, curious boy turned into the cruel young man in today's video? The answer, Roger knew, was gradual and painful to acknowledge. After Margaret's death from breast cancer, Roger had thrown himself into work as a way to cope with grief. Davenport Industries had expanded rapidly during those years, doubling in size and revenue. But while Roger was building his business empire, Kaysen was being raised by a parade of nannies, tutors, and eventually elite boarding schools. Every time Kaysen acted out, Roger had solved the problem with money. Fighting at school? Donate a new library wing. Caught cheating on exams? Endow a scholarship program. Arrested for drunk driving? Hire the best lawyers and make the charges disappear. Roger had told himself he was protecting his son, giving him opportunities that Roger himself had never had growing up poor in rural Georgia. But he'd really been avoiding the hard work of parenting, the uncomfortable conversations about character and consequences that might have prevented today's humiliation. His phone buzzed with another text from Kaysen. "Dad, I found out where that waitress lives. We need to send lawyers to her apartment tonight. Make her understand she messed with the wrong family." Roger stared at the message, feeling physically sick. His son wasn't just entitled and cruel. He was potentially dangerous. The thought of Kaysen showing up at a young woman's home, even with lawyers in tow, was terrifying. He scrolled back through months of similar messages, each one revealing more about the monster he'd created through neglect and enablement. Kaysen bragging about getting a professor fired for giving him a bad grade. Kaysen boasting about having a girl's scholarship revoked because she'd rejected his advances. Kaysen casually mentioning that he'd had a rival fraternity brother expelled over a fabricated honor code violation. Roger realized he'd been willfully blind to his son's true nature, accepting carefully sanitized reports from expensive schools and pretending that Kayson's victims didn't really matter as long as the family name remained untarnished. At 8:15 p.m., Delaney called with an update on her investigation. "I've spoken with 12 witnesses," she reported. "The story is consistent across all accounts. Your son initiated the confrontation, made inappropriate racial comments, and escalated the situation when Ms. Fowler tried to de-escalate professionally. What about her background? Anything that might explain why she was willing to stand up to him when others weren't?" "Interesting story, actually. Her grandfather was a labor activist in Jamaica who fought against powerful plantation owners in the 1960s. She comes from a family that values principles over personal safety." Roger absorbed this information, feeling a grudging respect for the young woman who'd embarrassed his son. She hadn't acted out of recklessness or anger. She'd acted from a deep-seated belief in human dignity that had been passed down through generations. "Sir, there's something else," Delaney continued. "I've been monitoring social media, and the story is gaining national attention. Several news outlets are picking it up as a story about class privilege and racial discrimination." Roger's heart sank. A local incident could be contained, but national news coverage would be devastating for Davenport Industries. More importantly, it would mean that Savannah Fowler would face scrutiny and possibly harassment from people who supported his son. "Have there been any threats against Ms. Fowler?" "A few concerning comments online. Nothing specific yet, but the attention is growing." Roger made a decision that surprised even himself. "I want personal security assigned to her immediately. Discreet protection, someone who can keep an eye on her safety without interfering with her life." "Sir, are you sure that's wise? It could be seen as admission of guilt or an attempt to influence her if this becomes a legal matter." "I don't care how it looks," Roger said firmly. "A young woman is potentially in danger because of my son's actions. That makes it my responsibility to ensure her safety." As Roger ended the call, he realized that this incident had forced him to confront truths he'd been avoiding for years. His son had become everything Roger despised about inherited wealth and privilege. Meanwhile, a restaurant waitress he'd never met had shown more character and courage in one afternoon than Kayson had displayed in his entire life. The irony was devastating and undeniable. The woman his son had tried to humiliate possessed the exact qualities Roger had hoped to instill in his heir. And the son he'd tried to protect and provide for had become a living embodiment of everything wrong with unearned privilege. Tomorrow, Roger knew, he would have to choose between enabling his son's behavior one more time or finally holding him accountable for the man he'd become. The decision would change all their lives forever. The morning shift at Mama's Kitchen was unusually tense. Word had spread throughout the community about yesterday's confrontation, and while most customers were supportive, Savannah could feel the undercurrent of anxiety among the staff. Everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Savannah had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if Kayson's family sued the restaurant? What if they found a way to get her deported? What if her standing up for herself had put everyone she cared about in danger? "You're overthinking this, honey," said Juliana, who had returned to work despite her pregnancy discomfort. She was restocking napkin dispensers while Savannah wiped down tables. "That boy got exactly what he deserved." "I keep thinking about what he said, though," Savannah replied, her voice low. "About his father owning half the city. What if he wasn't exaggerating?" Before Juliana could respond, the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors began echoing through the restaurant. Customers looked up from their meals, craning their necks toward the windows as the noise grew louder and more distinct. "Is that landing in our parking lot?" asked Cameron Schneider, a local mechanic who was enjoying his usual late breakfast. Through the large front windows, they watched in amazement as a sleek black helicopter settled onto the asphalt, its rotors gradually slowing to a stop. The aircraft looked completely out of place among the pickup trucks and modest sedans that typically filled Mama's Kitchen's parking lot. Savannah felt her stomach drop. This had to be connected to yesterday's incident. No one flew helicopters to family diners unless they had serious business to conduct. "Should I call the police?" Quinn asked, emerging from the kitchen with a concerned expression. Before anyone could answer, the helicopter door opened, and a tall, distinguished man in his late 50s stepped out. He wore a navy business suit that was expensive but not flashy, and his steel-gray hair was perfectly styled despite the helicopter ride. Even from a distance, his bearing commanded respect. Roger Davenport walked purposefully toward the restaurant entrance, ignoring the stares and whispers from customers who had pressed their faces against the windows. His expression was serious but not threatening, and Savannah noticed that he was alone. No lawyers, no security guards, no entourage of any kind. The bell above the door chimed as Roger entered, and the restaurant fell completely silent. Every eye was fixed on this unexpected visitor who had arrived in such dramatic fashion. Roger's gaze swept the room until it found Savannah, who stood frozen behind the counter with a coffee pot in her hands. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the crowded restaurant. Two people from completely different worlds connected by an incident that had changed both their lives. "Ms. Fowler?" Roger asked, his voice carrying clearly in the silent room. Savannah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Up close, she could see that Roger's eyes held none of the cruel entitlement she'd seen in his son. Instead, there was something that looked almost like regret. "My name is Roger Davenport. I believe you met my son yesterday." A collective intake of breath rippled through the restaurant. Several customers pulled out their phones, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. "I'd like to speak with you privately, if you're willing," Roger continued. "I have something important to discuss." Quinn stepped forward protectively. "Sir, Ms. Fowler is working. If you have business with her, you can make an appointment through proper channels." Roger turned to Quinn with respect. "You must be the manager. Quinn Ferguson, correct?" When Quinn nodded in surprise, Roger continued, "You've built something special here. A place where people are treated with dignity regardless of their background. I respect that. How do you know my name?" Quinn asked suspiciously. "I make it my business to understand situations before I act," Roger replied. "Unlike my son, I believe in gathering facts before drawing conclusions." Savannah found her voice. "What do you want with me, Mr. Davenport?" Roger's expression softened slightly. "To apologize, first and foremost. My son's behavior yesterday was inexcusable, and I take full responsibility for failing to raise him properly." This was not what anyone in the restaurant had expected. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd of customers and staff. "I also want to make amends," Roger continued. "Not because I have to, but because it's the right thing to do. May we speak privately?" Savannah looked around the restaurant, seeing encouraging nods from customers who had supported her yesterday. Otis Gutierrez, the retired detective, gave her a subtle thumbs up. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here," Savannah replied firmly. "These people are my family. I don't have secrets from them." Roger nodded approvingly. "Fair enough. Ms. Fowler, I've spent the last 18 hours investigating yesterday's incident. I've watched the video, spoken with witnesses, and reviewed the facts. My son was completely in the wrong." "I could have told you that for free," said Marilyn Hunt from her corner booth, earning a few chuckles from other customers. "You could have," Roger agreed with a slight smile. "But I needed to hear it from multiple sources because I've been willfully blind to my son's character for too long." He turned back to Savannah. "What you did yesterday took courage. You stood up to someone who thought his money made him untouchable. You defended not just yourself, but your co-worker and the dignity of this establishment." "I was just doing what anyone should do," Savannah said quietly. "No," Roger replied firmly. "You did what very few people have the courage to do. Most people, including myself for too many years, look the other way when wealth and privilege are abused." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, but not the kind anyone expected. Instead of corporate letterhead, It was a simple white card with handwritten information. Ms. Fowler, I understand you're working toward a nursing degree while supporting yourself and helping family in Jamaica. I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to any nursing program of your choice, plus living expenses, with no strings attached. The restaurant erupted in gasps and excited murmurs. Savannah stared at the card in shock, unable to process what she was hearing. I don't understand, she said slowly. Why would you do that? Because my son tried to destroy something beautiful, and I want to help build something even better, Roger replied. Because you've shown more character in one day than he's shown in 24 years. And because it's time I started using my resources to support people who deserve opportunities rather than enabling people who squander them. Savannah's hands were shaking as she looked at the card. Written in Roger's neat handwriting was the contact information for Delaney Clay, along with a note, full educational funding, no obligations, effective immediately. There has to be a catch, Savannah said suspiciously. People like you don't help people like me without wanting something in return. Roger's expression grew sad. People like me, he repeated quietly. You're right to be suspicious. Most people with my resources do expect something in return. But maybe it's time to change that pattern. He looked around the restaurant, taking in the faces of working people who had supported Savannah's courage. My son believes money makes him superior to everyone in this room. I want to prove him wrong by using that same money to support someone who truly deserves success. Otis Gutierrez stood up from his booth. Son, I've been watching people for 70 years, and I can spot a con artist from a mile away. You're either the most elaborate liar I've ever met, or you're actually serious about making amends. I'm completely serious, Roger replied. And there's more. He turned back to Savannah. I'd also like to offer you something else. A helicopter tour of Atlanta this afternoon, if you're interested. Not as a publicity stunt or a way to buy your silence, but as a gesture of respect. I want to show you the city from a different perspective, literally and figuratively. The offer hung in the air like something out of a fairy tale. Savannah looked around at her co-workers and customers, seeing wonder and encouragement in their faces. Think about it, Quinn whispered. When's the next time someone's going to offer you a helicopter ride? But Savannah was thinking about more than just the helicopter. She was thinking about the scholarship offer, about the genuine remorse in Roger's voice, and about the possibility that not all wealthy people were like his son. She was also thinking about her grandmother's words from last night. Courage is doing what's right even when you're terrified. Maybe it was time to be courageous again, but in a completely different way. Savannah stood in the employee break room, staring at Roger Davenport's business card for the 20th time in 3 hours. The lunch rush had been a blur of curious customers asking about the helicopter and the billionaire's offer, but now that things had quieted down, doubt was creeping in like fog. You're overthinking this, Juliana said, settling her pregnant frame into a plastic chair. The man offered you a full scholarship. That's life-changing money. That's exactly what worries me, Savannah replied, tucking the card back into her apron pocket. Nobody gives away that kind of money without expecting something in return. What if this is just a more sophisticated way of buying my silence? The break room door opened, and Ezekiel entered, wiping his hands on his apron. Mind if an old cook shares some wisdom? Savannah nodded, grateful for any perspective that might help her make sense of the situation. I've been watching rich people for 60 years, Ezekiel said, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight. Most of them think money can fix everything, including their guilty consciences. But that man who walked in here today, he looked ashamed. Really, truly ashamed. Or he's a really good actor, Savannah countered. What if the whole thing is calculated? Show up in a helicopter, make a grand gesture, get me to drop any potential lawsuit. Meanwhile, across town in the exclusive Brookhaven Country Club, Cason Davenport was having lunch with his friends Oliver and Logan, his mood growing darker with each passing minute. The private dining room overlooked the golf course, where wealthy Atlanta residents played their afternoon rounds in blissful ignorance of the storm brewing in their midst. "I can't believe he hasn't called me back," Kaysen said, checking his phone for the 100th time. "It's been over 24 hours since this whole mess started." "Maybe he's handling it quietly," Oliver suggested, picking at his Caesar salad. "Rich people problems require rich people solutions, right?" Logan looked up from his own phone with a troubled expression. "Dude, you need to see this. Someone posted photos of your dad's helicopter at that restaurant today." Kaysen snatched the phone, his face going pale as he scrolled through the images. There was his father, walking into Mama's kitchen alone, looking serious but respectful. The comments below the photos were even worse than the original video. "He's actually talking to her," Oliver said incredulously. "Your dad is negotiating with the waitress instead of destroying her." "This is insane," Kaysen muttered, his hands shaking with rage and confusion. "He's supposed to be on my side. I'm his son, his heir. That girl is nobody." "Maybe he's playing some kind of long game," Logan offered weakly, but even he didn't sound convinced. Kaysen stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I need to get home. I need to find out what the hell he thinks he's doing." As Kaysen stormed out of the country club, his friends exchanged worried glances. They'd seen him angry before, but this was different. This was the fury of someone who'd always gotten his way suddenly discovering that the rules might not apply anymore. Back at Mama's kitchen, Savannah's shift was ending, but her internal turmoil was just beginning. She'd agreed to meet Roger at the nearby shopping center parking lot at 4 p.m. for the helicopter tour, but every minute that passed brought fresh waves of uncertainty. "You could always change your mind," Quinn said, counting the day's receipts. "Nobody would blame you for being cautious." "But what if I'm being stupid?" Savannah asked. "What if this really is a genuine offer and I'm too suspicious to accept help when it's offered?" Her phone buzzed with a text from her cousin JC in Kingston. "Nana told me about your drama. That white man really offering you free school? Sounds too good to be true, cousin." The text hit Savannah like a cold splash of water. Her family's skepticism mirrored her own fears, adding weight to the voice in her head that whispered about ulterior motives and hidden agendas. At 3:30 p.m., Savannah walked to the shopping center, her stomach churning with anxiety. The helicopter sat gleaming in the afternoon sun, drawing curious stares from shoppers and passers-by. Roger stood beside it, checking his watch with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting for important decisions. "Ms. Fowler," he said with a genuine smile as she approached. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," Savannah admitted. "I've been thinking about your offer all day, and I have to ask you directly. What do you really want from me?" Roger's expression grew serious. "That's a fair question, and you deserve a direct answer. I want to prove to myself that I can use my wealth to support someone who deserves success instead of enabling someone who squanders opportunities." "So this is about your son, not about me," Savannah said, her voice sharp with disappointment. "No," Roger replied firmly. "It started because of my son's behavior, but it's about you now. About the courage you showed, the dignity you maintained, and the potential you represent. My son sees people like you as obstacles to be moved or destroyed. I want to see you succeed because it proves he's wrong about everything." The explanation was honest but somehow made Savannah feel worse. "So I'm what, a symbol? A way for you to feel better about being a terrible father?" The words hit Roger like physical blows, but he didn't flinch. "Maybe that's part of it," he admitted quietly. "Maybe I am trying to ease my guilt by helping you. Does that make the scholarship offer less valuable?" "It makes it feel like charity," Savannah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Like I'm some kind of project for you to feel good about yourself." Roger was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ground between them. When he looked up, there was real pain in his eyes. "You're right to be suspicious. You're right to question my motives. But let me ask you something. If someone offered your grandmother $1 million to start a business, Would she turn it down because the person's motives weren't perfectly pure? The question caught Savannah off guard. Her grandmother had always been pragmatic about accepting help when it was offered, even when the giver's motivations were questionable. "That's different," Savannah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it? You have a chance to become a nurse, to help people, to build the life you've been working toward. Does it really matter if my reasons for helping are partially selfish?" Before Savannah could answer, a black Porsche screeched into the parking lot, tires squealing against the asphalt. Kaysen jumped out, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted at his father, striding across the parking lot with dangerous intent. Roger stepped protectively in front of Savannah. "Kaysen, go home. This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't concern me?" Kaysen's voice cracked with hysteria. "You're consorting with the enemy. You're rewarding the woman who assaulted me." "She defended herself against your harassment," Roger replied calmly. "There's a difference." Kaysen's gaze fixed on Savannah with pure hatred. "You think you've won something, don't you? You think Daddy's money is going to solve all your problems." "Kaysen, enough," Roger warned, his voice carrying a threat that made several nearby shoppers stop and stare. "No, let me tell her the truth," Kaysen continued, his voice rising. "This is all guilt money. He's not helping you because you deserve it. He's doing it because he feels bad about what a failure he is as a father. You're nothing but a tax write-off to make himself feel better." The words hit Savannah like a physical assault, confirming every fear she'd been harboring. She looked between father and son, seeing the family dysfunction that had created this moment, and suddenly felt like a pawn in someone else's emotional chess game. "You know what?" Savannah said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "Maybe you're both right. Maybe this is about guilt and tax write-offs and feeling better about family dysfunction. But I don't need anyone's charity, and I sure don't need to be caught in the middle of your family drama." She pulled Roger's business card from her pocket and handed it back to him. "Keep your scholarship. Keep your helicopter ride. I'll earn my nursing degree the same way I've earned everything else in my life. Through hard work and determination, not through handouts from guilty billionaires." With that, Savannah turned and walked away, leaving both Davenport men standing beside the helicopter in stunned silence. She'd chosen her pride over the opportunity, her principles over pragmatism. But as she walked back toward the restaurant, Savannah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made either the biggest mistake of her life or the most important decision she'd ever made. The question was, which one was it? The evening air in Atlanta carried the faint scent of magnolia blossoms as Savannah walked slowly through Piedmont Park, her mind replaying the afternoon's confrontation on endless repeat. She'd left Mama's kitchen after her shift ended, needing space to think away from well-meaning coworkers who kept asking about the helicopter offer she'd rejected. Her phone had been buzzing with messages all evening. Texts from Juliana asking if she was okay. A missed call from Quinn checking on her. Most painfully, a voice message from her grandmother that she hadn't been able to bring herself to listen to yet. Savannah found an empty bench overlooking the lake and finally pressed play on her grandmother's message. "Baby girl, I heard about what happened today from your cousin. She said you turned down a scholarship because you thought it was charity." Nana's voice carried across the distance with loving concern. "Child, let me tell you something your grandfather once told me. He said pride is like salt in food. A little bit makes everything better, but too much ruins the whole meal." Savannah closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten to spill over. "You don't understand, Nana," she whispered to the empty park. "It felt like I was being bought." But even as she said the words, Savannah found herself questioning her own reaction. Had Roger really been trying to buy her silence, or had her own pride made her interpret his offer in the worst possible way? She thought about Kaysen's cruel words in the parking lot, designed to hurt and humiliate. But she also remembered the genuine remorse in Roger's eyes, the way he'd stepped protectively in front of her when his son arrived. Meanwhile, across town in the Davenport mansion, Roger sat alone in his study, staring at the business card Savannah had returned to him. The house felt more oppressive than usual, filled with the echoes of his confrontation with Kaysen earlier that evening. The argument had been brutal and long overdue. 24 years of avoided conversations about character, consequences, and accountability had finally erupted in Roger's foyer. Kaysen had screamed about betrayal and family loyalty, while Roger had laid out hard truths about entitlement and privilege. "You're choosing her over your own son," Kaysen had shouted, his face red with fury. "I'm choosing right over wrong," Roger had replied calmly. "Something I should have taught you to do years ago." The conversation had ended with Kaysen storming out, threatening to contest his inheritance and destroy the family name out of spite. Roger had let him go, finally understanding that some relationships couldn't be saved by money or patience. Now, sitting in the silence of his study, Roger found himself thinking about Savannah's accusation that his offer was just guilt money. She wasn't entirely wrong, but she wasn't entirely right either. Yes, he felt guilty about his son's behavior and his own failures as a parent. But his respect for Savannah's courage was genuine, as was his desire to support someone who embodied the values he'd failed to instill in his own child. Roger picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Delaney's number. Despite the late hour, she answered on the second ring. "Mr. Davenport? Is everything all right?" "Delaney, I need you to set up a scholarship fund. A real one, with a board of directors and transparent selection criteria. I want it focused on supporting hard-working students from underrepresented backgrounds who are pursuing healthcare careers." "That's a wonderful idea, sir. What should we call it?" Roger paused, thinking about the young woman who had sparked this moment of clarity. "The Courage Foundation. And I want Ms. Fowler to be the first recipient, whether she applies for it or not." "Sir, she might not accept it even if it comes through official channels." "Then we'll have to prove to her that it's legitimate. That it's not about guilt or charity, but about recognizing and rewarding the kind of character this world needs more of." As Roger ended the call, he made another decision that surprised him. He wasn't going to pursue Savannah immediately. Instead, he was going to give her time and space to process what had happened, while demonstrating through actions rather than words that his commitment to change was real. At 8:45 p.m., Savannah finally returned to her small apartment in East Atlanta, a modest one-bedroom place she shared with her roommate Adriana. The apartment was empty. Adriana was working her evening shift at the hospital where she'd recently started as a radiology technician. Savannah made herself a cup of tea and sat on the second-hand couch she'd bought from a thrift store 3 years ago. Everything in the apartment reflected her careful budgeting and practical choices. No expensive furniture or unnecessary luxuries, just clean, functional items that served their purpose. Her phone rang, and she saw Quinn's name on the screen. "Hey, honey," Quinn said when she answered. "Just wanted to check on you. Big day today." "I'm okay," Savannah replied, though she wasn't sure that was true. "Did I do the right thing, Quinn? Turning down the scholarship?" Quinn was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something? When I first opened this restaurant 22 years ago, a wealthy businessman offered to invest money in exchange for changing our menu and atmosphere. He wanted to make us more upscale and sophisticated. What did you do?" "I turned him down flat. Said I didn't want his kind of help." Quinn chuckled softly. 3 years later, I almost lost the restaurant because I was too proud to accept a legitimate business loan from the same man. Sometimes our pride protects us, and sometimes it hurts us. The trick is knowing which is which." After Quinn hung up, Savannah found herself replaying every interaction she'd had with Roger Davenport. His arrival at the restaurant had been respectful, not threatening. His apology had seemed genuine, not calculated. Even his offer had been made publicly, in front of witnesses, rather than in some private meeting where pressure could be applied. Maybe her pride had led her to see manipulation where none existed. Maybe she'd been so prepared for the worst that she'd been unable to recognize something good when it was offered. At 10:15 p.m., Savannah made a decision that required more courage than standing up to Kaysen had. She called her grandmother in Jamaica. "Nana, it's me. I listened to your message." "Good. Now tell me what's really bothering you about this scholarship." "I don't want to be anyone's project," Savannah said quietly. "I don't want to feel like I owe my success to someone else's guilt or charity." "Baby, let me ask you something. When you were 12 and your parents died, did you refuse to live with me because you didn't want to be a burden?" "Of course not. That was different." "How was it different?" "I took you in because I loved you, but also because I felt responsible for my daughter's child." "Was that charity?" Savannah felt her carefully constructed reasoning beginning to crumble. "No, that was family. And when you send money back here to help with my medical bills, is that charity?" "No, that's taking care of family." "Then maybe," her grandmother said gently, "this man is trying to build something like family. Not blood family, but the kind of family that comes from shared values and mutual respect." After ending the call, Savannah sat in her quiet apartment and forced herself to imagine two different futures. In one, she continued working multiple jobs while slowly earning her nursing degree, always wondering what might have been. In the other, she accepted help from someone who seemed genuinely committed to supporting her dreams, allowing her to focus on her studies and graduate sooner. The difference wasn't just about money or convenience. It was about the kind of nurse she could become with proper education and resources, and the number of patients she could help throughout her career. At 11:30 p.m., Savannah picked up her phone and composed a text message to the number on Roger's business card. She wrote and deleted it 5 times before finally settling on something simple. "Mr. Davenport, this is Savannah Fowler. If your offer is still open, I'd like to talk. But I need to understand exactly what you expect in return, and I need your word that there are no hidden conditions. I'm willing to listen if you're willing to be completely honest." She hit send before she could change her mind, then sat back and waited for a response that would either validate her faith in human goodness or confirm her worst fears about the intentions of the wealthy and powerful. The choice had been made. Now all she could do was hope she'd chosen wisely. Roger Davenport's phone buzzed at 11:32 p.m. the night before, but he didn't see Savannah's message until he woke at dawn. When he read her text, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope tempered with genuine nervousness. This young woman had already proven she couldn't be bought or intimidated. Now she was giving him a chance to prove his sincerity. He typed his response carefully. "Ms. Fowler, thank you for reaching out. I would welcome the opportunity to speak honestly with you. Would you be available this morning at 10 a.m.? I can meet you wherever you feel most comfortable." Savannah had suggested they meet at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, a neutral public space where they could talk without the pressure of helicopters or restaurant audiences. Roger arrived 15 minutes early, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt instead of his usual business attire. He wanted this conversation to be between two people, not between a billionaire and a waitress. He found Savannah sitting on a bench near the rose garden, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a bright yellow sundress that made her look younger than her 26 years. She stood when she saw him approaching, her posture straight but not defensive. "Mr. Davenport, please, call me Roger. And thank you for giving me this chance." They walked slowly along the garden paths, the morning sun filtering through the trees as families and tourists explored the exhibits around them. The normalcy of the setting helped ease the tension between them. "I need to understand something," Savannah began. "Yesterday, your son said this was all about guilt money. About you trying to feel better about being a bad father. How much of that is true?" Roger was quiet for several steps, considering his answer carefully. "Some of it is true," he admitted. "I do feel guilty about the man my son has become. I do regret the opportunities one missed to teach him better values. But my offer to you isn't an attempt to erase that guilt." "Then what is it?" "It's an investment in the kind of person I wish my son had become. It's a recognition that character and courage deserve support, regardless of someone's bank account or family name." They paused beside a fountain where children were tossing pennies and making wishes. Savannah watched a little girl close her eyes tight before throwing her coin into the water. "What do you expect from me if I accept the scholarship?" she asked. "Nothing except that you use it to become the best nurse you can be," Roger replied immediately. "No media appearances, no endorsements of my companies, no obligation to speak positively about my family. Just the education you've been working toward." Savannah turned to face him fully. "And what happens when you get tired of feeling guilty? What happens when supporting me stops making you feel better about your son? Do I lose the funding halfway through school?" The question revealed the depth of her concern and the practical wisdom that had kept her safe throughout her struggles. Roger understood why she needed these assurances. "The scholarship will be administered through an independent foundation with its own board of directors," he explained. "I'm funding it, but I won't control it day to day. Your support will be guaranteed for the duration of your nursing program, regardless of what happens between us personally or with my family." "You've already set this up?" "The paperwork was filed this morning. The Courage Foundation is now a legitimate non-profit organization focused on supporting healthcare students from underrepresented backgrounds. You'll be our first recipient, but hopefully not our last." Savannah felt tears welling up in her eyes. The level of preparation and thought Roger had put into addressing her concerns was overwhelming. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment gesture driven by guilt. This was a carefully planned commitment to something larger than either of them. "There's something else," Roger continued. "I spoke with the nursing program director at Emory University yesterday evening. They have a spot available in their accelerated program starting this fall. With your grades and work experience, you'd be an ideal candidate." "Emory!" Savannah's voice was barely a whisper. Emory's nursing program was one of the most prestigious in the Southeast, but also far beyond her financial reach. Full tuition, books, living expenses, and a stipend for your grandmother in Jamaica, Roger said quietly. "You could graduate in 18 months instead of 3 years and start your career without any debt." Savannah sat down heavily on a nearby bench, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. This wasn't just a scholarship. It was a complete transformation of her life's trajectory. "Why?" she asked, looking up at Roger with tears streaming down her face. "Why are you doing this for someone you barely know?" Roger sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Because 2 days ago, I watched a young woman risk everything to defend her principles and protect her coworker. Because you showed more character in 5 minutes than my son has shown in 24 years. Because the world needs more nurses who understand what it means to fight for people who can't fight for themselves." He paused, watching a couple walk hand in hand through the garden. "And because I finally understand that the only way to honor my late wife's memory is to support people who embody the values she tried to teach our son." "Tell me about her," Savannah said softly. "Margaret was a pediatric nurse before we married," Roger replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She believed that healing people was the most important work anyone could do. She would have loved your courage and your compassion." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, surrounded by the beauty of the garden and the possibility of a future neither had imagined just days before. "If I accept this," Savannah said finally, "I want to pay it forward. When I'm established in my career, I want to help fund scholarships for other students like me." "The Foundation Board would welcome your involvement," Roger replied with a smile. "In fact, I'd like you to consider joining the board once you graduate. We need people who understand what it means to work for opportunities rather than inherit them." Savannah stood up and extended her hand to Roger. "Mr. Davenport." "Roger, I accept your offer. But I have one condition." "Name it." "I still want that helicopter ride. Not as part of any deal, but because I've never seen Atlanta from the air, and I have a feeling it's going to look very different to me now." Roger's face broke into the first genuine smile he'd worn in years. "I think that can be arranged." 3 hours later, Savannah found herself soaring over Atlanta in Roger's helicopter, watching the city spread out below like a living map of possibilities. She could see Mama's kitchen from the air, tiny but vital in the sprawling urban landscape. She could see Emory University, where she would soon begin her accelerated nursing program. She could see the neighborhoods where she'd struggled and the hospital where she hoped to work. "It's beautiful," she said into her headset, her voice filled with wonder. "It's home," Roger replied. "You're home now, in a way it never was before." As they flew, Roger pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the city's history. But more importantly, they talked about the future. About the kind of nurse Savannah wanted to become. About the patients she hoped to help. About the legacy they both wanted to build through the Courage Foundation. When they landed back at the Botanical Garden, Savannah felt transformed. Not because of the money or the opportunities, but because she'd chosen to trust in human goodness despite her fears. She'd chosen vulnerability over pride, hope over cynicism. 6 months later, Savannah was halfway through her first semester at Emory when she received an unexpected visitor at the hospital where she was doing her clinical rotation. Kaysen Davenport stood in the lobby, looking humble and uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. "A real one this time." Savannah studied his face, seeing genuine remorse where there had once been entitlement. "What changed?" "My father cut me off completely after our confrontation. For the first time in my life, I had to get a real job and face real consequences for my actions. It's been humbling. And I realized that you were right to stand up to me. I was everything you said I was, and worse. I'm trying to become better." Savannah nodded slowly. "Apology accepted. But the real test isn't saying you're sorry. It's proving you've changed through your actions." "I know. I'm working on it." As Kaysen left, Savannah realized that the confrontation at Mama's kitchen hadn't just transformed her life and Roger's. It had set in motion a chain of events that was healing an entire family's dysfunction. 2 years later, Savannah graduated from Emory as valedictorian of her nursing class. Roger attended the ceremony along with her grandmother, who had flown in from Jamaica for the occasion. As Savannah walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she thought about the courage it had taken to accept help when it was offered with genuine respect. That evening, at the graduation reception, Roger raised his glass in a toast. To Savannah Fowler, who proved that true strength comes not from what you have, but from what you're willing to stand up for. "And to Roger Davenport," Savannah replied, "who proved that wealth can be a force for good when it's guided by wisdom and compassion." As the crowd applauded, Savannah felt her heart full of gratitude for the confrontation that had seemed like an ending but had actually been a beginning. She'd found not just educational opportunity, but a mentor, a father figure, and a path toward the nursing career she'd always dreamed of. The little girl who had once watched her grandfather fight powerful men had grown into a woman who understood that sometimes the greatest victories come not from conflict, but from the courage to build bridges where others see only walls. Love had won in all its forms. Self-love, respect between equals, and the love of community that transforms individual courage into lasting change. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.